here's what I don't understand. At one point in time, the consensus was that humans and mammoths were not walking together, were not coexisting in North America. That used to be the consensus. And then some years ago, they discovered a mammoth up in the northeastern part of America somewhere. I think they found it in Delaware somewhere. They found it in the northeastern part of the United States. Then they say, actually, no. Now we know that humans and mammoths actually were hanging out together in North America. All this stuff about trust to science, everybody. So this guy was born with a dick. He gets it chopped off, puts a dress on, and now, according to the scientists, he's a woman. But now, and also, you must believe, because if you do not believe in this, you're an idiot. You must believe that we evolved from primates. And you must believe that millions of years ago, a bunch of Africans went into Europe and raped Neanderthals, and humanity sprung from that. You have to believe that. Even though we're still debating on stuff that happened in the Civil War, stuff that happened in World War I, stuff that happened in World War II, people are still arguing about what really happened on 9/11. Oh, we know damn well what happened 50 gazillion years ago. Trust the science. Absolutely. I also disagree with your opinion on the Olympic opening. I think most were upset about the guy with his berries out. People were very upset by that, but people were also upset by the mockery of Christianity. That's just an absolute fact. People were absolutely upset by that. There were Muslims who came out and said they were upset by the mockery of Christ. A lot of people came out and said they were upset by the mockery of Christ. That was mentioned many times very specifically. Very specifically. They teach that humans came from Africa, then they went to Europe, and then they had sex with Neanderthals, and then they spawned all of the races except the Africans. So all of the races are the product of humans, African dudes, banging Neanderthal chicks. All of the human race, for the exception of Africans, are the result of African dudes banging Neanderthal chicks. And they teach that only the Africans do not have Neanderthal blood. Everyone else has Neanderthal blood running through their veins. So what you're saying then is that the African people are at a lower stage of human evolution, and that the Africans are actually closer to the earlier primates than we are, than everyone else is. It's a low-key racist ideology there. Why is it that most sophisticated civilizations came from Babylon and Syria? So here's the thing. When you study the history of Europeans, it's very fascinating history. You read about what? You read about Anatolian farmers. Then you read about Yamnaya peoples who came from the Caucasus. So Caucasus, that's pretty close to Anatolia. Anatolian farmers, and they came from Anatolia. Europeans are basically, from what I understand, and this is the consensus of forensic archaeologists, forensic archaeologists. The Europeans come from a mixture between Anatolian farmer and Yamnaya, and then also Indo-Europeans who came and they intermixed, and I don't know, they introduced the wheel or something like that. So Anatolian farmer, people who came from Turkey, and then you read about Yamnayas, people who came from the Caucasus, and they migrated northwards. They went into Eastern Europe, and then from there they went into the rest of Europe. And Yamnaya people, they went all over the place, right? They went to Ireland, they went to Germany, Central Europe, all that. Eastern Europe, they went to Turkey, not Turkey, they went to Siberia, Central Asia, all that stuff. And then different cultures branched out as a result of that migration, that massive migration. But they were warring people. I mean, we still can see their weapons, their axes, and their knives and all that. And we can also see a little bit of their artwork, actually. We've seen a number of stelae that was made by the Yamnayas. One of the most famous ones, if not the most famous one, was found in Russia. And you can see it's a stele showing a naked man. And then on the side is a little image of a man and a woman having sex. And then also on the same stele, you will see a tree. And it is believed that this represents the tree of life. So you have a tree of life, a man and a woman having sex and a naked guy in the front. To me, it's almost like a corruption of the Adam and Eve story. So you have the tree of life. That's where we began. Humanity came from the union between man and woman. So there's a religious fertility aspect to that. Then you have the naked man. I don't know exactly what he represents. Some sort of god. But what do you see? The Anatolian farmers, Yamnayas who come from the Caucasus. That it all revolves around Anatolia. Very interesting. It all revolves around Anatolia. So you go to the book of Genesis, and it talks about what? The ark crashed where? Where did the ark land? It landed in Mount Ararat, which is right near Anatolia. So humanity resumed itself right near Anatolia. And then you see the oldest Indo-European civilizations that we know of. You go to, where are they, right? They're in the Anatolia. Hittites, Lydians, they're in Anatolia. Most ancient agricultural site that has been found, or the oldest archaeological discovery to be found when searching civilization is found where? In Turkey. And somebody mentioned Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is very ancient, extremely ancient. And they find it in Turkey. But they also find the oldest remnants of human civilization in Mesopotamia. And what does the Bible tell us? It tells us that after the flood, the ark landed near Anatolia. And then you have the migration of the sons of Noah and their children. So you have people going into Anatolia, Gomer. So Japheth really, really goes to Anatolia. And then it talks about the civilization that begins to be built in Shinar, which is in Mesopotamia. So really, the Bible is telling us that civilization is beginning where? It's beginning in Anatolia, it's beginning in Iraq. And where do you see the oldest remnants of human civilization? You find them in Anatolia and in Iraq. So, very fascinating. Very fascinating. It's amazing. People were reading the Bible before the advent of modern archaeology, and it says it right there in the Bible. It speaks of a people called the Hittites. Well, for a very long time, the experts said that there was no Hittites. Hittites never existed. And then the archaeologists said, actually, they did. So trust the science, everyone. Just trust the science. They all know better. They all know everything. Well, it would start there because Noah's Ark landed in Mount Ararat. That's correct. That's correct. Neanderthal chicks. The German all-women band. Yeah, that sounds about right. When you look at the world map, Eastern Anatolia is the best geographic location for humans to spread out in even direction. It's right there in the center. That's what they call it, Central Asia. But where do you see the oldest civilizations? You find them where? In Mesopotamia. You find them in Anatolia. You find them in Iran, the Elamite civilization. You find it right there. And then later on, you hear about the Aryans going into India, and they established the Indo-European civilization in India, which is very fascinating. Very, very fascinating stuff. But yeah, you see it all there. I'm guessing the Aryans, if I'm not mistaken, the Aryans were the descendants of the Yamnaya. I'm not entirely certain. When you look at the Vinca culture, Kuranova culture, a very interesting thing when you bring up these Neolithic cultures or prehistoric cultures, you actually find remnants of civilization from these people. It's really interesting. Sophisticated civilization. You find these megalithic temples, for example, in Malta. They found 5 megalithic temples in Malta, and they are very sophisticatedly built, are massive. There's one megalithic temple they found in Malta that had a stone that was, I'm not exaggerating, literally tens of thousands of tons, not pounds, tons. And they were able to lift these stones up to build these religious sites. I mean, it is amazing. And of course, here's another interesting thing. Look up underwater continents. That's really fascinating. Underwater continents. They found a whole underwater landmass that's connected to Great Britain and the Netherlands. And they proved that there was human civilization, human activity on this giant landmass when it was up on the surface, above the water, and it was connecting Great Britain and the Netherlands. So there was a giant land. If you look at a map, you find where the Netherlands over here, you find cross the sea, you eventually hit Great Britain. There was once upon a time a giant landmass connecting Great Britain and the Netherlands, and people were able to travel right into what is now known as Great Britain. Well, they are in I want to say in the Netherlands or in Great Britain. There's actually, you can go to the bank. There's a coastal strip that connects with the underwater landmass that was once connecting Britain and the Netherlands. And they have found, on this strip of coast, they have found some really fascinating stuff. They have found, for example, a religious site, kind of like Stonehenge. Not as big as Stonehenge, but it was like Stonehenge, with rocks put together in a circular way. The rocks were put together to make a big circle. They have found flint, things like that. But it shows that these people had religion. They had religion, and they had religion on this landmass that is now underneath the water. So it's pretty fascinating. There's a lot of things that we don't know, And then also in I want to say in Croatia, off the coast of Croatia, they found an underwater road. Yeah, I'll show it to you guys. It's pretty crazy. Let me show you guys this stuff. But trust the science guys; they know everything. Look at that road. Cobblestone road and everything. I mean, they had civilization. All underneath the water. All underneath the water. Now check out the megalithic temples in Malta. These are amazing, guys. Look at this. Look at that. Remnants of ancient temples from civilizations that no longer exist. Civilizations about which we know nothing. I'm sure they wrote things. We don't know. But it's just amazing that humans were doing this stuff supposedly in the era that we know as prehistory, which is the era in which humans existed when they but we have no really writing from them, right? There's no writing that has survived from those civilizations. So the writings that have not survived, the civilizations that may have had writing that we don't have today, we call those civilizations members of prehistory, or being a part of what is known as prehistory. So, for example, when Plato speaks of Atlantis as being this massive civilization, we would call that prehistory. We don't have any records of it. We have no literature from that civilization. So we just call it prehistory. Now, if we find... What happened to the music? Now, if we find remnants of a civilization, like in Malta, but there's no writing from that civilization, we just find archaeological artifacts and archaeological ruins from a civilization, then we would just say, oh, that's part of prehistory, right? This is prehistoric. It's prehistoric. It's before the Hellenic and the Greco-Roman civilization. But I mean, look at this. Isn't this amazing? Look at this. And these stones are extremely heavy. I think the talk about Atlantis, the world. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think Atlantis definitely existed. It's very interesting. There is a dialogue of Plato that you can read, in which the founder of Athenian civilization, Solon, the first Athenian king, goes to Egypt. Again, there was a lot of overlap between Egypt and Greece. And an Egyptian scholar is speaking with Solon, and they're talking about Atlantis and all this. So they're talking about this massive civilization that existed. And the Egyptian tells Solon, oh, you Greeks are like children. You Greeks are like children. You just began civilization, but what you don't know is that civilization has been here for a very, very long time. And you read in the book of Genesis, it speaks about how after the flood, immediately human beings began building civilization. It talks about the 3 cities in Shinar, one of them being Babel, Calneh, Babel. Immediately there was civilization, and they were building towers. building towers. It was right there. There's a whole load of human civilization that existed that we either have not found remnants of, or we have found remnants of them, but we don't have enough information to know enough about them. I mean, look at this one. This is, I mean, very sophisticated looking. This is from thousands upon thousands of years ago. It was right there. Did these people leave writings? We don't know. We don't have any remnant of any writings from these people. Look at this one. I mean, this is from inside one of the megaliths in Malta. This is supposedly Neolithic. All right, they call this Neolithic, but look at this. This is obviously very sophisticated. And then you see those cave drawings in France. Those cave drawings are very fascinating. They're sophisticated. They're beautiful. I mean, they have their own aesthetic beauty to them. And the cave that they found these cave drawings in is very vast. It's very wide. The consensus now is that that cave was used as a religious site, and the artwork was religious in nature. We have one line of text from the people from the civilization that drew the drawings in the cave in France. We have no idea what it means. Nothing, not a damn clue. There was one civilization that was discovered in India, ancient Indian civilization. It was a Dravidian civilization. What was it called? The Indus Valley civilization. This was the Dravidian civilization. And we have a lot of engravings from the Indus Valley civilization. We have no idea what it means. Nothing. We haven't found a Rosetta Stone to help us understand, to help us crack the code of the Indus Valley. It would be amazing to find out what the people of the Indus Valley were writing about, but we don't know. We don't know. And we don't know everything. We sit there and say, oh, the Bible is a bunch of myths. At one point in time, people denied the existence of the Hittites. They said that Hittites didn't exist. The Bible said the Hittites existed. And then later on, the archaeologists said, oh, actually, no, the Hittites did exist. Well, we knew that already. We knew that already. So they want to tell us that human beings didn't really have civilization until a certain point. That's a bunch of nonsense. Human beings always had civilization. Always. Always had civilization. It's just that human beings have been here long enough that whatever civilizations that we had a very long time ago, before the advent of the Greeks or the advent of the Egyptians, was, for the most part, wiped out, was destroyed. So humanity has had so many wars, humanity has had so much destruction that it makes sense that much of civilization that we built a very long time ago in far, far antiquity had been wiped out, had been just demolished. Tragic that talks of Atlantis, similar civilization, have been hijacked. Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you. I think there's a lot of weirdness and cringe in the discussion on Atlantis. But if people were just to read what Plato wrote about Atlantis, or what Diodorus Siculus wrote of when writing about Atlantis, you can just read about it. There's nothing alien. There's no aliens. There's nothing cringe or anything like that. It's just talking about a civilization. That's just the bottom line. A civilization that existed a long time ago. It's very fascinating when you read Plato. He talks about how in Atlantis there was these massive temples that existed, and how in each temple was an idol, and the idol was enormous. It was very lofty. The ceiling was very lofty. It was very tall, very high ceiling. And it talks about how the idol, he says, you would walk into a temple, and the idol, you would see the idol, the statue of the god, and the statue was always on a chariot, and the chariot had dolphins around it, images of dolphins, and the hand of the statue would be touching the ceiling. And this is not from ancient Egypt. This is not from ancient Rome or ancient Greece. This is from a civilization that we have no remnant of, or at least not that we know of. But you find under the water roads, all sorts of stuff. There was definitely civilization that got subsumed into the water. But Plato speaks about how in Atlantis there was water in the sky. The water was filled with moisture. and how there was so much moisture underneath the earth and above the earth that humans had wonderful agriculture. Anything would grow. And how there was always fountains and there was always springs, and the earth always was fed and nourished, and things thrived and were so flourishing. Reminds me of what it says in the Bible, how there was this firmament above the earth, and it was this shield of moisture that protected humanity that protected the earth from UV rays. But then eventually it talks about a war, and the problem is that Plato's explanation on Atlantis is cut off. We don't have a complete manuscript of Plato's discussion on Atlantis, his dialogue on Atlantis. It's very sad. But you can read Diodorus Siculus, and Diodorus Siculus gives us a very detailed account of Atlantis, and he learned this from the Egyptians. Diodorus Siculus talks about how this city was in North Africa, or it was, off the coast of North Africa, and it was very sophisticated, super sophisticated, and then it was later destroyed. The idea of aliens could have come from people summoning and interacting with demons. That's true. That's true. Sources conflict. I don't know why the sources conflict on the location. I do know that if you read Diodorus Siculus's history, he tells us that Atlantis existed around the area of the North African coast. They have found this underwater structure. Now, the consensus now is that it's natural, it never was built by man, but look at this for yourselves, guys. They find this underneath the water off the coast of Japan. Look at that. That is obviously man-made. And look at the diver. That shows you how big the structure is. It's huge. And look at it. It goes upwards. It's massive, guys. This is man-made. This is man-made. And you see this right here. They find this under the water. Obviously from human civilization. Look at this. Look at this. Looks very unnatural to me. In my opinion, in my estimation. But there's an entire reality within history that we have not seen in its total and full reality, in its total and full state, because a lot of it was destroyed, and a lot of it has been forgotten and neglected, but it's being discovered little by little. And what humans have found, really does bespeak a very rich human civilization in far antiquity, and you find its remnants underneath the water. You find the remnants in ruins, archaeological ruins, that we know very little about, or the builders of which we know very little about, or know nothing about. Hey, for example, I remember reading about how there was this battle in Gaul between the Romans and the Gauls. And the Gauls came in, they had like 70,000 warriors to fight the Romans. And the Romans did defeat them. It was a massive battle in this forest in Gaul. And they say that when you go to the forest in France where this battle took place, you don't find one bit of archaeological evidence that a battle took place. You don't find any swords. You don't find any helmets. You find nothing. Why? Because archaeology is not the end-all, be-all of finding historical reality. It's not. It helps us, but it shouldn't be the final metric that determines whether or not something happened. So they say, well, we went to the Red Sea. We don't find any Egyptian chariots. There's no archaeological evidence that an Egyptian army was in the Red Sea and got subsumed by its waves. There's no evidence of an exodus in the Red Sea. There's no archaeological evidence. That does not mean it did not happen, because archaeology cannot and will never find the totality of historical reality. It just won't. It's impossible. Just like you can go into a forest in France and they'll say, well, a battle took place here, and you don't find Roman swords everywhere or shields everywhere, because things happen. Those stories, those events were so long ago that remnants of these events get destroyed, they get stolen, people confiscate them, whatever. Archaeology is not the end all be all. It's not the final metric of knowing historical reality. It's not. Bro, people loot and pillage after the... That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So there won't be a lot. That's right. That's exactly what I said. Yeah, I agree. And the hats and weapons that came into Egypt. Yeah. Very interestingly enough, Diodorus Siculus went to Egypt. He was a Greco-Roman historian back in the, I want to say, 2nd or 3rd century AD. He went to Egypt and he investigated Egyptian history. And he said that when he was interviewing these Egyptian priests, because the Egyptian priests were the people who they held the records of Egyptian history. And he said he was interviewing this one Egyptian priest who told him about a man named Moses. He said, there is a man named Moses in our history. And the priest told Diodorus that at one point there was a pharaoh who basically said he wanted to get rid of everyone who had physical disabilities. Is a little bit of ancient eugenics. And there was a man named Moses who stood for those who had disabilities. And he led a revolution against the pharaoh, and he led a massive exodus of people out of Egypt. Diodorus writes this. You can read this for yourself. Diodorus Siculus on Moses. And he says they named this man Moses. He was this revolutionary figure, but the Egyptians wrote very negatively about him. They wrote very negatively about him. So you could say, well, there's no archaeological evidence, but Diodorus Siculus is speaking to an Egyptian scholar who's telling him about a man named Moses who led a massive exodus out of Egypt. Archaeology is not the end-all be-all of understanding history. It's not. In fact, I would say that written records are much more important because they're intact. You read Herodotus, you read Thucydides, you read the Book of Exodus, you read Diodorus, you see this intact narrative. Archaeology can guide us, it can aid our research in history, but it shouldn't be the only metric to determine whether or not something happened. When Julius Caesar says there was a massive battle in a particular forest in Gaul, I believe Julius Caesar. Damn what the archaeology tells us. Or damn the archaeologists if they say that it didn't happen because we have no evidence for it.